Yeah, I guess 20 minutes goes fast, so here we are. So Mary and I are, unfortunately, Leah's not able to be here. Mary is the Associate Program Director at APD Health in East Orlando, and I'm one of the Assistant PDs in Washington University in St. Louis. Different backgrounds coming from our backgrounds to get to the APD position, and so we were really interested via the core community of practice to start looking into this. And so Mary really kind of knows a lot more about the data behind this, what we're going to talk about here. But we'll kind of jump into our objectives first. So first we're going to talk about a couple of different ways to kind of set yourself up for if you're interested in becoming an assistant or associate program director. So how you can go about that from wherever you are right now. So there's some data that we're going to present from the 2024 National Survey of Emergency Medicine APDs. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the insights from that data, what some of the advice was from the different APDs who answered the survey as far as getting into the role, and then how you can really set yourself up for success both in the role and then kind of explore that, see if it's the right role for you as we go along. So I'll let Mary take the lead.
Thank you. So we'll start with the legend. So disclaimer, this is SAEM today is the first time that our final data has been presented, and this was a pretty big survey that represented a big chunk of the APDs in the country. So it's a pretty novel data set, and we found some very interesting things. But there's just a little bit of background. So I served 2 years as the vice chair of the Court APD Community of Practice. Alina was our chair for 2 years, and one of our big goals was to kind of have this resurgence of the APD Community of Practice and bring the conversation back to the forefront about what the APD does, their scope of practice, maybe a little bit of information on like hours and protected time and things like that we could use both for conversation and for negotiating tools. So that was one of the things we wanted to do. We looked at the fact that there are 279 EM programs across the US as of 2024 when the survey was done. And we talk a lot about the program directors at those programs, but we don't talk as much about the APDs at those programs, even though there are maybe 2 to 3 times as many APDs in the US as there are PDs in emergency medicine. And like I said, there's no standardized EM APD career norms. There's no like set responsibilities or expectations. And also there's no published data on EM APD satisfaction with the role and the workplace. And so we sought to investigate a little bit about that and maybe even do some subgroup analyses based on demographic characteristics, both personal and professional demographic characteristics. So what we did is a cross-sectional survey of it entailed 35 questions. It was a very long survey, but the data was very important. We first created a work group within the Court APD Community of Practice that was interested in doing this research. We used Strobe and Artino et al. To guide our construction of the survey and then dissemination. And we piloted it within the community of practice, did analysis of the preliminary data, validated an original scale that we had created for the survey internally, and then we formally sent it out via email to all of the APDs as designated in the CORD member directory. And overall, we had a 73.6% response rate after lots of contacts, but we got there. And of all the people that we reached out to, which was 493, 310 of them actually provided useful data for us, and so that's still a pretty big pool. And you can see that our sample was spread across the United States in a pretty good distribution. We have a lot in the kind of on the coastal regions, but we have representation from all of the regions as defined by the AAMC. And we had participants that came from many different demographics. We looked at sex, gender, ethnicity, age group, and then we also looked at some professional demographics that we'll look at a little bit closer in just a sec. But essentially what we want to talk about a little bit is the fact that of our participants, we had demographics that identified as both women and men. Men a little bit, we just had 51% men and then 47% women, and then some about 1.4% selected any other option or specified. For ethnicity, we found that 72% of our APDs that were surveyed identified themselves as being white, and 28% identified themselves as being non-white. And among those, we had, in order of descending percentages, we had Asian Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Black African American, and other or multiracial at the lowest percentage. And when it comes to age distribution, most of us are on the younger side, between the 30 and 39 year old range. And it kind of tapers off as you get up in the age range towards the 60s. And we looked at those professional demographics that I had mentioned a second ago. So we looked at different training stages, medical school, senior year of residency, and then fellowship. And we found that like the type of medical school that most had done was allopathic medical school. So that was 89% of the APDs who had responded on our survey. We had 14% DOs and then 0.3% MBBS. When asked whether they were chief resident or no, there were 59% who identified themselves as having had been chief resident in their senior year of residency, and 41% said that they had not been a chief resident. And so we wanted to characterize this question because a lot of times when people are aspiring to be an APD, they figure that it's chief resident or bust. They think that there's no way they could possibly get into program leadership if they weren't a chief resident, and we wanted to dispel that myth because it's not true. And then for fellowship, we wanted to figure out if aspiring APDs or people who are new to the role these days are going into fellowship more often. And we found out that overall, 160 or 56% of our APD pool reported they did no fellowship. And then I'll go into a little bit more detail here, but there were plenty who had done a fellowship, but the type of fellowship within there is quite varied. But overall, when we look at these three stages of education and training, we found that the APD demographic, although there's a lot of variation, it tends to be MDs who were chief residents and who did no fellowship. Now, when we break down the fellowship question a little bit more, like I said, 44% said that they had done fellowship. The most common fellowship was medical education, followed by ultrasound, tox, simulation, EMS, PEM, and then some less common ones down at the bottom there. Okay, shift gears a little bit, take a couple of minutes to just talk about some subgroup analyses here. So we were interested in finding out if APDs these days were more likely to have completed a fellowship when they were in their, if they're in their early stage of their career at this point, versus maybe 20 years ago when emergent new grads were considering whether or not to do a fellowship. And we wanted to get a little bit of a time trend here just to see if it was more common to do a fellowship when you're planning on entering the APD role here these days than it was 20 years ago. And we actually, we found that it's much more likely that early career APDs have done a fellowship. It's just much more commonplace these days. When we looked at the late career or what we call the veteran APDs currently, it was much less common that they had done a fellowship. So becoming, you could argue maybe it's being viewed as more of an expectation, not a requirement, but it's maybe providing a little bit more, it's just becoming a little bit more of a commonplace. And when we look at years to APD, we found that women were becoming APDs actually quite a lot quicker than men, more than a year quicker than men. which was the opposite of what I would have thought at the beginning of this study. So that was interesting. And we also found that when we looked at ethnicity as the subgroup, it was roughly the same, but non-white folks are becoming APDs slightly quicker than white people, as identified on the survey. But when we look at both gender and ethnicity across like the cross section of those two, we get a little bit more interesting patterns. So it was really interesting to me that actually white men are taking the longest to enter the APD role. White women are taking the shortest. And then for non-white men and women, it's roughly about the same amount of time between those two. But really, really interesting patterns here. And then we looked at time spent in residency admin roles up until the point where they took the survey in 2024. So first, we looked at the assistant, associate, program director breakdown. We found 44% were assistant, 56% were associate of the people who took the survey. And then we looked at the mean time as core faculty before they became an APD, which was about 2.2 years. We looked at the mean time in the APD role so far, so either assistant or associate program director, overall was about 5.3 years. And the mean time that our associate program directors had taken in the assistant role before becoming associate was about 2.4 years. And just for full disclosure, that's the extent of the data that we're going to present in this presentation for in terms of numbers. But that's maybe about like 10% of the data that we collected. And we just, 20-minute talk. We got to save some of it for later.
So now that we've kind of gone over a little bit of the landscape of where we're coming from with this data, we're going to talk a little bit more in practical terms about how we're going to plot out that journey to become an APD, or if you're considering it as you move forward for yourself. So you are here, wherever here is, and it can be really kind of anywhere from being somebody who's already doing some education, whether that's in residency or in not fellowship, into your faculty life, to being a researcher, kind of having administration, or even making a lateral move from a different position somewhere in the department. So no matter where you are starting from, the kind of you are here is a little bit of the same feel, because you're going to be, as soon as you are in residency, you're going to have some opportunities to get involved in residency leadership. So even as a resident, but definitely if you're coming into this as a faculty member or fellow, you really need to be looking for those leadership roles where you can get a feel of what you're going to be doing as part of program leadership at PD, APD. So that can be chief resident, it can be the chair of a committee within the residency, depending on where you are. It's going to be either as a resident or as a faculty member. And then there are going to be opportunities, if you look for them, no matter where you are, to start looking at some of the curriculum development, evaluation, the teaching, and some of the thoughts that residents have about their program, and the annual program evaluations. You can get involved in taking a look at the data from those as well. So really, the CCC starts to come in as you get into being a faculty member. You cannot be on the CCC if you are a resident. This is where we evaluate residents, but it gives you a really good idea of actually what sort of doing the bulk of the work of being an assistant program director entails, which is kind of, assessing people on milestones and the ACG things. But there's also other things that, like the program evaluation committee. You can be a resident and be on a program evaluation committee and just kind of get a feel for what people think is going well, what's going poorly, what they might want to change. So as you kind of move along, at this point, you really could be any point in your career to start doing this, but you'd be moving along more so towards being a faculty member. You need to start developing those really kind of pointed mentoring relationships. You need to start having relationships with people that you're going to be working with as an educator and as an assistant program director or APD. So that's going to be residents, it's going to be the program director, it's going to be maybe the vice chair of education, maybe it's the chair in your department. Anywhere that in that chain of command, you're going to start to need to get those relationships laterally, sort of downwards and upwards. And then you're going to need to continue to show yourself and others that you're improving your actual practice as an educator. So it's not just, oh, I really love teaching, I want to do more teaching, because we're going to find out. It really is a little bit more of the nitty gritty of what does it mean to educate and kind of have a program level understanding of things. So national conferences, and then there's training programs like I think Merck and what was the other one we talked about this morning?
ASAP
Completely
teaching
drawn a
fellowship.
yeah, the
Yeah.
teaching fellowship. So
Mhm.
lots of those different programs. And then as you're going along, obviously, the more that you can get involved in education scholarship, the better. And really need to be meeting those core faculty requirements, which, if you're not sure what those are, you do need to be a core faculty member in order to become an APD. So you can check with your program coordinator or program director as to what that entails for year to year. So this is just a little bit different way of looking at it. On the early side of your career, Resident Plus, you're going to really want to start establishing those relationships, getting involved in leadership. What does it mean? What does it look like to be an APD? Getting involved in whatever committees you can. And then as you move along, you get a little bit more senior. Really, the benefit of the fellowship is to have that protected kind of time and structure to get some more extra training in whatever area you want. So you get people, I mean, you're not paid very much, but I can tell you, but you do get things paid for you. You get some time to go ahead and do them. You get some more sort of direction from people who are going to be mentoring you. And then as you're really moving into the faculty sides of things, it's going to be nurturing those relationships, making sure that you are getting the connections that you need. You're staying visible, you're staying relevant in your program. So we did take a look at some of the narrative comments from the APDs in this survey and got a lot of really good insight from that. So
There were like 180 people who provided
yeah,
feedback or like narrative advice, and that accumulated like a couple thousand words or several thousand words of advice. So it's really, really potentially very useful for aspiring APDs.
And in full disclosure, we also used natural language processing software to kind of also look through this data and give us some insights onto what some of these themes would be. But then we of course vetted them out kind of between the different pieces of advice. So first, obviously, know what you're getting into, right? Know what you need to get where you need to go, and then really start to plan out how you're going to achieve that. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources, so you're going to want to make sure that you have a really clear picture of what that's going to mean for you in your life as you're moving forward. So then you're going to need to start plotting out the activities that you're going to get engaged in, the committees that you want to join, the education that you want to do. You're going to start needing to signal for yourself, like 2 different members of your community, like, hey, I think I really want to do this. I want to get more of an idea of what's involved. I need to set some expectations, with my chair, with my program director, with the other APDs of what I'm really going to be doing, what's expected of me, and what I'm expecting out of this as well. So with that, you are going to be in kind of one of those second in command positions, right? So you're not going to be the ultimate leader, but you're really going to have a lot of responsibility to be the bad guy in some situations. So you're going to be doing, some sort of delivering of really hard feedback, but then you're also going to be needing to make sure that you're supporting your program director and that they are getting out of your APDship what really they need in order to be effective as well. So a lot of this is thankless, right? So you can start, like, sometimes you just need to row, there's no wind. And so you need to really kind of dig in and start doing that really kind of manual, that hard labor. And then you look up at the end of the day and you're exhausted and you have splinters and blisters and like you're still in the middle of the ocean and it feels like you're getting nowhere. So it can be a little bit tough. But in the end, really, it's just going to be, there's going to be storms, there's going to be things that residents are going to have to get through, that the programs are going to have to get through, like new program requirements for all of the residencies. And the idea is to really not necessarily let yourself get sunk by some of this, but to equip your residents to get through these themselves and then kind of set them forth to go forth themselves. So a couple of the insights that we found.
So we're not going to get like into lots and lots of the details from the guidance that was offered by the APDs, like at a granular level. We wanted to focus on the themes, but one thing that you should absolutely do from the get-go is negotiate for your buy down time. You will never get as much protected time as you are spending in your role as an APD. And you also won't get reimbursed at the same rate for those protected hours as you do for your normal clinical hours, like pretty much across the board. So you aren't going to get paid very much for this time that you're spending in this administrative role. And that's just part of the name of the game. We sacrifice a lot to be medical educators and program leaders. And, fortunately, most of the folks who took our survey did end up having really high overall APD role and workplace satisfaction. But this is not going to be to anyone's financial benefit. Okay. Remember that the job is its own reward. The APD position is probably not fairly compensated at all, but it can be totally worth it when you see your kids, residents, grow from awkward interns into confident, skilled attendings. Set expectations for the role early. Don't do the APD role for the residents to like you. Consider what role you would like to have as the APD and if taking the position aligns with your goals. Figure out what specific tasks your PD wants you to fulfill as an APD. This is important. Stay visible. Get involved with your residency committees, as Dr. Thomas was saying. Get involved with grand rounds, lectures, journal clubs, etc. to help get yourself a seat at the table. If a position becomes available, you want to be at the front of people's minds. You want to be the person that everybody remembers has been active and engaged the entire time. Leadership equals admin. If you like teaching and working with residents, program leadership is not the best way to get more of that. If you want some more of that and a lot of admin work, an APD is a great way to go, or a PD is a great way to go. You'll spend 2 or 3 more hours doing admin work or attending meetings for every 1 hour of clinical time that you're bought down.
And then finally, the biggest thing that really came up over and over again, and the most commentary was just do it. You know, it was rewarding enough that people felt that they were really glad that they had done it, and they advised everybody else, if you're interested, just go ahead and take the leap and do the same. So, with that, do you have any questions? But,
All right.
if you do, feel free to reach out.
Jeff,
Thank you.
you did want to start the first slide, so I can